Okay, I'm going to show you a lot of examples of different kinds of buildings and ceramic products. So you might want to take some notes in case you see something that's interesting, jot it down, and then that way we can talk about it at the end, or you can look it up as well. All right, let's get going. Okay, mud bricks, the beginning of ceramic architecture, right? Clay is in dirt, but dirt is not in clay. So many kinds of soils have clay in them and it kind of holds it together. So these mud bricks are like being packed in little frames and they're sun baked, and that solidifies them enough where you can make structures out of them. This is a giant ziggurat. You guys probably have learned about this in History of Architecture or Survey of Western Art History. So giant mud brick buildings, we're talking thousands of years old. Humans have been using clay for a very long time to live in, worship in, work on, all of these things. All over the world, still people are living in earthen built homes. And a lot of these homes are, like I said, sun dried. And so they would need repairing, after every rainy season. Or some of them are actually fired. Like you would build the main structure of your house and then set it on fire and actually kind of fire the clay in place and then build the rest of the structure around it, which sounds fascinating to me. Some of them are fantastic and enormous. And what is fun about this to me is challenging the rectangle, right? Or challenging hard edges, maybe. This one still has very many orthogonal edges, but challenging edge condition. I like that. Tiles, of course, once we really start, I'm trying to think, maybe 6,000 or 7,000 years ago, you can find the documentation of glazes where people start really firing clay with more glass on the outside of it to decorate it, as opposed to just the clay itself. So this is a historical example from the Ishtar Gate of Babylon. And this picture is from a museum in Berlin, where you can actually see these tiles. So these animals are those animals are enormous. They're meant to intimidate you. There were hundreds of them on these beautiful gold and blue tiles all along the outside of this building. And so this has been dug up and you can see them again in person in Berlin. This is the Alhambra in Spain, and it is covered with fantastic tiles. I'm gonna pop you guys down a little bit. Covered in fantastic tiles, also plaster. This is called tessellation. I'll talk about it in a minute, but just absolutely covered with different geometric shapes. So, yeah. Roof tiles are also a ceramic product. This is this shape is actually originally made from laying clay slabs over the human leg. It has like a natural tapered form. Roof tiles come in a lot of different shapes. You can kind of see where they are from based on their shape, like what their section is, how they interlock together. And you can make all different kinds of roof shapes because you can individualize those ceramic pieces. And here you can kind of see how the water is shed off of them. So they have this underlayer piece that would be put on first, and then those semicircular pieces that are put on top. So it sheds all the water down. Here's what the underside of one of those roofs look like. This is from Ecuador. So it has this wooden frame that's holding these different sections of ceramic tiles up. Here you can kind of see them stacked up, and this is those houses and structures from the outside. That middle picture on the bottom is like a metal frame that's holding the wooden rods and then holding in place all of those different tiles. Here's some, they've actually been collected. Ecuador had a terrible earthquake, and now it's been probably 6 or 8 years, but people collected all those building materials and then put them, like right back on their houses. So this is just looking inside of a traditional home in the volcanic region of Ecuador. Clay is used in all sorts of architectural settings. So these are like stoneware pipes, which would be good because they're not normally eroded by chemicals. So if you were, flushing anything away, they're gonna last for a really long time. But they kind of fit one inside of another. So one of the hard things about them is that they can get shifted in the ground and kind of come apart from each other. But this is a pretty typical building material. When I moved into my house, it had pipes.
Martha, are those pipes glazed, or is stoneware non-porous?
It is, when fired to temperature, is not porous. So I'm betting those are probably not glazed. To me, it looks like they're just kind of colored from, being fired, gas fired, stacked and stuff. Thanks for the question. Please don't hesitate to just let me know. I have my chat thing kind of small, so just feel free to talk. Yeah, if we were in the Kiva, this would be different. Okay. Ooh, this is terracotta tile on the outside of an art museum in Charlotte, North Carolina. I love this building. It's so funky, and I love the sort of updated use of the terracotta tile. And we have a professor here, Nathan King, who he worked on a tile in at Harvard that was self-shading. So you see how the tiles on the bottom right, like the top, you can see it's hit by the sun, but the underside is a little bit more shaded. And actually, the shape of the tile had it in the direction of the sun, so it was more shaded than not. So because of the shape of the tile, it was like cooling. It was more of a cooling system than like a surface that normally gets heated up and then transfers heat inside the building. I thought that was interesting. All right, this is like a ceramic surface that's on the outside of these are like panels. So people are using ceramics on the outside because you can build them in such a way that they're actually kind of off the wall. And it changes the air pressure inside of the building to kind of have this like air pocket between like a rain screen panel and some of the insulation of the building itself. And so these panels are like these really long extrusions. So what you're seeing in the upper right hand corner is just like a little section of them, but those things can be extruded on a die to be really long panels as well. So the extruder and using the die in the studio is one of our options for this semester for molded ceramics. But I love to see these things on outside of buildings. This is like a rain screen, so ceramic and glass mixed together. It makes a really beautiful texture. Variation in color, I think, is quite attractive. So that's what these things kind of look like. They're long extrusions, and then that way you can slide, like metal pipes, or rods through them to kind of place them. And what happens is like during certain parts of the year, the sun comes through holes, and in other parts of the year, it doesn't at all. So it can heat or cool an area. This is what those kind of panels look like on the outside of the University of Queensland. And what I love is what's happening on the inside. So those panels are creating this really interesting light effect and pattern, almost like a tile themselves inside that interior space. So it has a functional and an aesthetic value to it. They come in tube forms too. They're on the outside of the New York Times building. Ceramic decking, that same kind of extrusion that you would have seen the rain panels with, is also happening for decking. And you can imagine this would be nice. It doesn't splinter. You don't have to paint it. I of course am curious about how brittle it would be and whether or not it would heat up in the sun, like what kind of reflection it would have. I'm not sure. And we see a lot of we're pretty familiar with two kinds of things, like especially us as Hokies, like everyone's used to like brick texture, and then now we are living in a world of random ashlar. I like to kind of think about what bricks can be, and this national park I think is gorgeous and sort of challenges what you might consider a traditional brick wall in the way that these arcs are made and the way that they intersect in the light that's happening between them, in the negative space between them. And so I love seeing these forms and then the way the bricks are laid in different ways to create these really surprising curves. So just one of the things that I enjoy about this class is when students are, kind of interested in challenging what preconceived ideas they come with about material and building opportunities. And that goes from scale of architecture down to teeny tiny little things like tiles. So this slide tells me we're about to take a quick transition and I'm going to talk to you more about like tile design. So I just want to see if there's any questions about what I just said. So I'm just going to pause for a minute and see if there's questions.
Is there like a particular, I know we were talking about like earthenware, stoneware, porcelain yesterday. Is there a certain type that's most common in a building?
Yeah. Most earthen built homes would be earthenware because you're often that kind of structure would be coming from local sources. And so you would assume that there's foreign material inside the clay body itself, which it makes it more on the scale of earthenware. However, bricks certainly range from earthenware to stoneware. And beyond that, they become more important when there's some sort of thermal load. So bricks that would be specific to the outside of a building may not be the exact same bricks in all cases that you would use around a fireplace or someplace that had like a heat sensitive area. And then that would be especially true if it was like you were building something for an industrial setting. So not all bricks are created equal when it comes to their refractory materials, right? That's why a lot of people would use them in a structure, is because during the day, they're like reflecting that heat back into the environment from the sun and they slowly warm up. And so what happens is that keeps the inside cool. And then in the evening, that heat has been transferred into that space. So when it's colder outside, it's keeping that heat in because of that slow transfer. And so there's a lot of different settings for that. That was a big answer to your question. Are there any other questions? Okay, let's talk a little bit about tiles. So I think this section is going to be about tile design. Just like when I look at a tile, I immediately notice how it's designed. In what way is it working together? Because rarely do you see, unless it's like a piece of art, do you see a single tile by itself. It's almost always working in combination. So I just want to kind of talk to you about traditional ways that tiles work in combination. The first one, yeah, here we are, bricks. Just a basic translation. A set of bricks is a single module that's slid to in one direction where all the points on the module are slid the same amount. So this is a super common way to make tiles. This was just, imagine elevating the brick just slightly by even giving it a curve. But translation is just a really easy way to take a module, just slide it around, put it next to itself. So single form, slid in one direction, all the points, same distance, put it together. The next one is rotation. So taking some point of a module, some idea of a form, and then rotating it around a center point. For us, I have this little image. We're gonna use photography over the weekend to kind of help us investigate textures, but I just took this, imagine this as a tile. And if I start to rotate that tile and I put it back together, then I get a pattern that maybe wasn't evident in the single module. And then when I put a lot of those together, then I get a primary and a secondary pattern. So if you look at that original square that was in the upper left-hand corner where the dark is kind of that center point, if you look, diagonal down to the right, and now all of those white lines, those striking white lines are kind of coming together, you end up getting a primary and a secondary pattern with a single tile that's been rotated around a point. So this is called a 4-point rotation. This is super common. You don't know it, but you've probably seen it 1,000 times. So the same tile rotated around a single point, and then you can imagine it gives me a secondary image when all of those things kind of come together. This one would be one that could be easily split up. It's a graphic, but you could imagine if I wanted to get really complicated geometric shapes, where do I break the tile over this pattern? There's a lot of different places in this form that I could emphasize depending on where I broke it up. Okay, the next type of tile design would be like reflection. So translating a point over a line. And here we're going to use the same one just so you can see how dramatically different patterns can be with the same module, but then you start doing something different to them, and the shapes that are joined together really change. So this one is where that tile's been mirrored to the right and then up and down as well. And if I had asked you, I doubt you would have said, oh my gosh, I can't believe there's going to be a series of really striking diamond forms that comes out of mirroring this object. So you can take a single module and really discover a lot of new things based on the way that you arrange them and put them together when you think about tiles and pattern making. So here's just a couple of examples of objects that use mirroring in their surface decoration. Here's the idea of positive and negative in that same vein of mirroring. What does it do to the balance of the image? So we're going to talk a lot about composition when we talk about tiles, almost like a blank canvas. So we looked at the translation was where things slid, and the reflection is where we have that mirroring effect. And so now a glide reflection is those things working together. So it's like your footprints. So they're mirrored to each other, but they're not exactly offset. They're not directly offset. They have a little bit of a jog to them. And of course, MC Escher is a master at making patterns. So that's why I put him up there. If you ever get the chance to see his work in person, like his actual woodcut blocks, it's fantastic. All right, so let's see what happens with this little pattern now. So we're looking for that glide reflection. So that is that single image slid to the right, and then it's mirrored and slid again, mirrored, slid again. So this one you might commonly see as like a braid. That is something that is mirrored and has a little bit of a slide to it. Okay, scale. Scale is another way to play with pattern and tiles. So taking that same shape and then scaling it up, making it proportionally a little bit, the proportions are the same, but the scale is different. So let's kind of take a look at what those patterns end up looking like. Here's one coming out from a spiral. So when you begin to plan patterns like this, so I think about, gosh, is that going to be all individual tiles? Like, how do I make patterns with scales work and make them efficiently as a craftsman or a designer? This one is kind of fun. I like surprises. And when you begin to investigate this one, if you look at the center rectangle, right, it shows the whole tile. And I usually look in the upper left-hand corner and I see a particular shape. It has, let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sides to it. It's kind of like a little squished hexagon. And then I look at the rectangle that's down below. That's a larger scale. And I see that exact same shape. And then it's also in the upper left-hand corner of the smaller rectangle. So I love this pattern because it's the same tile, but the way it hooks together makes itself smaller in the tile right next to it. It's clever, I think. So scale, this one's fun. Bubbles. I would use that bathroom if it was in a hotel. I think it would be nice. The last kind of, no, I think there's one more after this, freezes, but tessellation is an important grouping. I'm sure I have a bunch of pictures, which is there's a fundamental region, you put it together and there's no spaces between it. So even a lot of the ones we've been talking about, they're their boundaries have all been tessellations, especially that first one I showed you, the translation. But the idea that you could have multiple shapes together, or that the tiles are not always square, is just kind of something to think about. So tessellation is just filling up of the space with congruent copies of the same fundamental region where they don't overlap. And they could be fantastic. These are quite slick, I think. So hexagons put together. This one's kind of nice because there's a surface decoration in the middle that's rotating, but the tile themselves, kind of like the squares, staying the same. This is a tessellation. This one is nice because I love the translation of that leaf and the definition of the lines, almost like it was a 2D drawing into three-dimensional space. So look at the way in which that surface is formed to get those amazing shadow lines. Great. So tessellations. Oh, back to MC Escher and his bugs and weird animals. Tessellations, they're everywhere. Your job is to identify patterns, like 100% from now until when I see you again. Like, how many patterns do you live around? You live around 1 million of them. They're everywhere. I have some tiles I would love for you to hold and to see. Tiles like this, sometimes you think they're like hand painted, or you think, oh my gosh, did they make all those shapes individually? Some of the tiles like this are actually made like mosaics. So they make full sheets of color and then actually clip them apart once they're finished tiles and then mosaic them back together. Here, can you tell that that's a square tile and then the really intense pattern is painted over it? So it's like the least expensive way to make a really complicated pattern. But like I was saying, things like this, a lot of these constructions are going to be put together with finished tiles that have been cut apart and plastered back together. Imagine the amount of work, the amount of hours and planning that would take. It's just mind-boggling and fascinating to me. Tiles, it's endless. They cover the earth. Ooh, this one's a good example on the right. Can you kind of see the mosaic lines where it's trimmed? It's especially prevalent in the blue. So if you look at the dark blue, that's kind of like the background color. You can see how around the flower forms, it's been mosaic together to build that structure. Just an example where it might be. This particular area of the world at the time of the development of this blue color maybe would be Persia. Colors in ceramics developed over time based on where people were, where they lived, because of the materials that were available in the ground. So anything that you see on the outside of ceramics is some kind of fired rock. It's been turned into a glass. And so literally, depending on what kind of rocks around you, changes what colors you have available. So this is some of the earliest examples of, this area in Egypt are some of the earliest areas of blue being something that we use as artists. Fantastic. Okay, the Alhambra. I showed you a little bit about this before. You saw one tile. This is the lions in the middle. So again, just tons of shapes. These are not, the decoration comes from the geometry, not from the painting on the tile itself. And then this upper part, this that feels, well, you can see where it's like writing and stuff. That's all plaster. So the bottom part that's glossy is ceramic. The top part is probably some sort of cast plaster. The last little one is friezes. So different areas, there might be, in architecture, there are places where there's storytelling. Do you think about that as a place in your architecture where you might enjoy some storytelling? So strips along the tops of buildings or different areas inside of a building might have a really descriptive scene. And so that's a type of tile. And then, so these tiles have a narrative to them, and they're similar in shape, but across all of tiles, the carving is radically different. Oh, showed you this one already. There's a little bit of the details of those lions and animals. Palace of Persepolis. These things I'm hoping you're seeing in the history of architecture. Here's just a couple of more modern examples, just interiors, decorative tiles that go together, tiles inside of furniture. So this would have been at the turn of the 20th century, the arts and crafts movement. Gaudi, I was really hoping to go to see this in person last summer, and then the world stopped. So this is on my dream list. If you have been to Europe through the travel program, I envy you if you have seen Barcelona in person. Look how colorful it is. Wouldn't you want to walk through that park? Oh my gosh, I can't wait. Back to the United States, this is Louis Sullivan. So that is a brick building, but you see that green trim around it. That's terracotta tiles. His buildings were extremely decorative in this sense. These really extravagant three-dimensional tiles on them. And this green, it's like acid green. There's the front of another terracotta building, Louis Sullivan, Chicago. And back to the Boda. All right. So tiles, we're gonna make tiles in class. I'm really excited. We have a project to do together. Ooh, look at that. Wouldn't you want that funky walkway? We have a project to do together. The process is going to be to look throughout the world and find tiles that you like. Where do you see them? Do they exist in your life now? Have you ever traveled someplace that had interesting tiles? It's part of your home or not? I'm kind of interested for you to think and be able to describe, if there's a moment where you notice them, and if there isn't, can you start searching? And if you can't find a pattern that's ceramic, can you find a pattern from another material that interests you? And so when I think about patterns, I'm thinking about them both as visual texture and tactile texture. So we are going to make tiles together. This is an example of a tile project done with students that's in China right now. And so every time, if you look across it, maybe you can identify some repeating patterns. So these students use some of those original techniques that I was talking about, like the 4-point rotation or mirroring to make tiles. And then we put our tiles together inside of this installation, which is in a children's hospital outside of the pharmacy. I think I talked to you a little bit and maybe just showed you this, that we're working on something in the media building, these slabs we're going to talk about, but we have the opportunity to work on a space on campus. So our first project, I'm actually hoping that we can start making a collaborative piece that would be permanently installed. So this is inside the construction site of the new Creativity and Innovation District Living Learning Community. And this is like the main lobby. You can see that grand staircase inside that main lobby. And where I have highlighted up in the left-hand green spot is a place where we are allowed to install some tiles. And I think it's going to be visible from this walkway. That's why this picture is important to me. I think we're going to be able to see it as people walk around this balcony. And then when we get to it, we're actually going to cover this wall, come up over the corner in a curve, and then out onto the ceiling with a set of tiles. So that's kind of exciting. Here's what it looks like in a little bit of a render. So you can see one of the main things is that we're using a French ashlar pattern. So there's an opportunity to make 4 different size tiles. And then that grouping of tiles goes together in a pattern on this wall. So whereas the example I showed you in China had all of the tiles were the exact same size. They were all these 4-inch tiles. This one is going to have a little bit of a variation to it. And I've been experimenting. This is some funny things that happened last semester in a first year class. This is our first step just to kind of figure out like what's happening with the clay, like how do we get used to the material, things like that. But what I want to talk about this weekend is kind of give you the dimensions for what those tiles could be and have you begin to think about what kind of patterns would you like to try. And the interesting thing about this project, I think, is that you're going from 2D to 3D. So here, you could probably pick out a few tiles that are the same across scales. So easily, let's start with the guy who chose 6 squares in the middle. And then you can see his companion tiles off to the left, right? So did he think about how his pattern was working across all 4 shapes? And you can see some other ones here. I wonder if you can pick out any other companions, right? How they're working across those different shapes. So this is something that we're thinking about for our class. So I just wanted to kind of move us into what will we be doing physically. We're going to find some way for you to make a tile. And here, these students have made an individual tile and they're building a cardboard box around it for a casting box. And then we are going to pour plaster over the top of these. And what that allows us to do is to make multiples of those tiles. So I hope that the weather will be nice this semester. Some days we'll be able to work outside together and feel really comfortable and safe. So we decided to use some outside time to pour our plaster together and get these molds. And what happens is you can then use those molds to make multiple tiles. And here's a couple of the examples. And the one on the left was actually its original mold would have been made off of a 3D print. So I like the idea of using technology overlapping with some of our traditional techniques and seeing what we can get out of it. So one of our first projects is to figure out how to make a tile and then perhaps how to make multiples of it. If we can make multiples of it, then making a large scale architectural installation is possible. That's how these things are possible. Molding. So I have a few graduate students who have tried this too. You can see some of their drawings on the ground that we were talking about last semester. Really hard edge folks, man, look at those drawings, hard edges. The exciting thing that we're going to talk about is I really like what's going on over here on the right. That sort of plan view of the tile is fantastic. And then when we look at it from the side, there are parts of that could never be molded. Those straight edges, the depths of those cuts. And so that's what's exciting to me. That's where I think we're really going to learn is we make this choice about what a pattern could look like and how it might look in 3D. And then is it really possible to produce it? To make it an actual mold. So that's one of the challenges that we're going to face. So it's really easy.
Question real quick.
Yeah.
So for our tiles, do we need to, because you're using clay to make the initial plaster mold, do you always have to do that, or could I use chipboard or something like that to create the plaster mold and then use that to finish the project?
Yeah, great question. We can make the positive out of all sorts of things. So it can be raw clay, it can be 3D printed, it can be machined, it can be made through chipboard and sealed. All of the same principles of how the mold is made and how we release it from the plaster are the kind of talking points that we get to go through for the next week or two. So if you're looking for something that's really intensely geometric, then I'm going to, then it's easy to kind of use tools, more machining like tools or hard edges to build that positive, and then you get those same hard edges out of the clay. Some people are going to want to have soft lines or soft edges, and then those, of course, those positives would be made in a really different way. So yeah, you can totally stack chipboard. It's all about sealing it. So if you think about that material in particular, it absorbs water. So when you pour plaster over it, it has to be like waterproofed, or else it's going to swell and attach to the plaster.
Yeah, I think we've used like petroleum jelly and stuff in the past to do something like that. But yeah, I don't know. I was just wondering.
Yeah. No, it's a great question. Somebody else out there was probably wondering similar things. Yeah, we use, I almost always keep Murphy's oil soap in the studio, which is a pretty effective mold release. If something is, I think is going to be really tough to get out of a mold, then I'll use, like Vaseline, like some kind of petroleum jelly to get it off. And then a lot of times I'll build in a system to grab it. So let's say it has some hard edges, or it's not clay. Like clay, we can peel out of the mold. You don't keep that first positive. But if you have a 3D print, a lot of times I'll have you design in a little place where you're going to drill some screws into it so we can grab it with pliers and like pull it out of the piece. So yeah, I'm going to demonstrate all of that. We're going to talk about all those materials in relationship to drawings that you present for your ideas. Yeah. Thanks for the question. So these are just some testers of what it's looking like for this random ashlar. And you can see up in the that upper right-hand corner, the tiles that I made here all just came from found objects and tools that I have in my space. And so what's exciting about clay is it's really receptive to whatever you want to do with it. So I'm excited for you to explore texture and pattern. So I just wanted to kind of show you a little bit about where we're at. Remember me talking about that curved wall, like how it goes from the vertical to the ceiling. So this is just kind of testing that curve. Eventually we'll have like a curved surface in studio where people can drop tiles and curve them for this space. So I just wanted to kind of show you what that looks like. This is looking inside the pottery studio. So if you haven't been there yet, this is inside the glaze room. And those are the tiles that I was just showing you. This is what it kind of looks like to glaze them. So we have buckets and they've been fired once. So we make clay, we dry it out, we fire it once, and then we put glaze on top of it. And then we put it back in the kiln. And those are the kilns in the background, those big oven looking things with the lids open. So we put liquid glaze on the outside by dipping them in these buckets, and then we put them in the kiln, and when we get them out, they're different colors, and that's exciting. And here some of those colors are blended and mixed together to get different shadows inside of the texture. So I thought I'd just show you a few examples. So there's only three, well, it's not fully true. There's basically only 3 glazes on what the tiles I was showing you, and then overlapping them makes different colors. So you can get a range inside a family of colors. So I can get like 9 different colors out of, 3 different glazes. And then every once in a while, like for this green, there's 1 or 2 perhaps you can tell where I've used a darker green just in the texture to make, 1 extra layer. So that's 1 glaze, but with variations of its thickness, or if there's another glaze underneath it. Here's that white one with, you can see some of the ones that have darker glazes underneath or more brown glazes underneath, and that's changing the color a little bit. And then this one is the brown glaze, but with those different color greens underneath it, it really changes the tone of them, but they all sit really nicely in a family. So that's kind of the way that this wall would work, is that it ends up looking kind of like a quilt, in the way that we all have our own textures and we all have our own colors and we all have our own way that we've glazed our pieces, but they're still working kind of as a family. Yeah, this just kind of gives you a scale. So there's like other things in the picture so you can kind of see how big these tiles are. What it's look like. I think it's going to be pretty easy to control the curve and to get them to be curvy when they come out of the kiln. So clay likes to move and warp and bend. The one thing that's going to be different is that the colors in the space that we're using might be a little bit different. So we're going to explore some new glazes in the studio. So if you haven't been in my class before, that means nothing to you. But if you have been in my class before, we have a few new glazes, and that's pretty exciting. So I'm just going to end on this for a second, because what I'm going to want you to do over this weekend